thank you all for coming tonight. I'm very honored by each and every one of you's presence here. And it's a really great feeling to see so many friends together. And I'm going to say first, before I say anything else, that I don't want to make the mistake that Melchizedek made. And I'm going to say Baruch Hashem Lakel Elyon first. Because he's the one that starts, he's the beginning and the end of it all. And I am most appreciative of him, and I love him very much. Now, Potchim B'chvod Achsanya. It was many years ago, probably about 10, 12 years ago. I approached Rabbi Phil Chernovsky, who runs the educational program in the Torah Tidbits here at the OU. And I said, I need experience teaching. I have some things I want to get across. I'm very excited about the Maharal, and I need a place to deliver it and maybe to learn how to do it properly. So I want to get some experience. And he was so kind that he took a rank amateur and he allowed me to come to this very room and give a shiur the twice a year that I came here. I think twice a year that I came here. And there was always a nice crowd here. And I learned a lot about preparing and delivering shiurim. And I've had other experiences since then. Since we moved here, we're not in the same neighborhood anymore. Phil asked me, maybe you could write an article for the Torah Tidbits. Now, the Torah Tidbits is an amazing publication of great importance, and it goes out to 10,000 people every Shabbat, and people love it. And for all the many reasons, the fact that he edits my Torah Tidbit, the fact that he's given me opportunities to get started in my new career, I want to call upon Rabbi Phil Chernovsky.
He already told you about 3/4 of what I was going to say, so I'll just be specific. We started with Shabbat afternoon shiurim, 30 people. Went to the big time, close to 10,000 people. We now reach more than that. And I checked the numbers. Issue number 925, Parshat Noach, of 4 years ago was the first time that we carried Maharal Liprad by Dr. Kuhr. I will say simply this, wishing you the best of Haslacha with your Sfarim and with your teaching, that it has been totally mutual, a mutual admiration society, that we appreciate having your column in the Torah Tidbits, and I think that you appreciate having it there as well. Best of Hatzlacha.
Thank you very much.
And I did not get anything for this week.
I'll have to get to work on it. What's the deadline, Phil?
About a half an hour. Tomorrow morning.
Okay. I want to have Rabbi Berelwein say a few words. Rabbi Berelwein has been my Rav for the last 40-some years. And as the years go by, I appreciate him more and more. He does so much to me that he's had a tremendous influence on my life and my development in Torah. And I can't say enough about my appreciation for Rabbi Berelwein.
of Prague is one of the most enigmatic and yet wide-ranging great scholars in the history of the Jewish people. The Maharal is Kabbalah, but he's not Kabbalah. And he's philosophy, but he's not philosophy. And he is an innovator. He speaks to at a difficult time in Jewish history, for a change. And therefore, because of his persona, legends grew up about him. And the legends, my friends, are not necessarily always true, but they do characterize the person. You know, there are legends about the Chafetz Chaim and legends about Richard Nixon. But neither of them may be true, but they tell you something about the person. And the Maharal is famous for the legend of the fact that he was able to create a human being out of nothing, out of clay, meaning that he emulated God. And to a certain extent, that's our task. Imitatio Dei, we have to emulate God. And people, when they saw the Maharal, saw in him not only the Maharal, but the creator of the Maharal as well. He wrote a very famous commentary to Rashi called the Kuhr, which has been reprinted many, many times. But again, because of the fact that he is so wide-ranging, it did not, in my opinion, receive the popularity that it should have, even though in our time there has become, in the yeshiva world, a school of people who are Maharal people. Now, what Dr. Kuhr has done is he has taken the Kuhr Aryeh and he has made it relevant and understandable to us ordinary mortals who are not necessarily privileged to quite deal with the philosophic and Kabbalistic ideas, and he's taken them and he's put them in a readable fashion, in an understandable fashion, so that the Sefer has meaning to all of us. And I like the translation, The Lion Cub of Prague, because that really speaks to it. And anyone that wants to have an additional layer of enjoyment on Shabbat should read the essays of the Maharal that Dr. Kuhr has translated and transcribed for us as well. Dr. Kuhr is an example of someone who makes Torah his primary objective in life, and he has, over the years, through his medical practice, helped thousands and thousands of Jews, and non-Jews as well. And my own grandchildren were beneficiaries of his injections. And we have a long and happy relationship with Dr. Murray and Phyllis Kuhr. So the Lord should bless your efforts. We look forward to Chumash Bamidbar and to Chumash Dvarim. Don't stop now. And after you're done with the whole thing, then put out a second edition. Mazel tov. You took care of Yudah Levi for me.
Thank you. Rav Breidowitz came to us here in Yerushalayim, actually came about the same time that we did, and has been adding so much to our lives by having his Torah available to us in various forums. He is a great teacher and comes from a very broad background. I mean, Harvard Law School and professor of law at the University of Maryland. But he started off being a very, very prominent scholar at Ner Yisrael. And for the last many years, he had a stellar in Silver Spring and was professor of law. But that's not the whole of Rav Breitowitz. Rav Breitowitz amazes me all the time by the breadth of his knowledge and the ability of the way he puts it together and makes it interesting. And he knows that I am not his best student because I sleep a lot. But I do appreciate everything that he does, and I'd like to have Rav Breitowitz give us a little talk.
Can I sit here?
Yeah.
See, I normally am a rule, I don't sit on this podium because it splits on you, but I will make an exception in honor of this special occasion. First, I do want to give a tremendous mazel tov to Dr. Moshe and his Rebbetzin Phyllis, upon the completion of this work. Again, it's really a monumental work. The Maharal, as Rabbi Wein just told us, is one of the great, great thinkers of the Jewish people. But so much of his Torah has remained inaccessible because very little is in translation. And to this day, very little is in translation. This is a major contribution. And my bracha to you is you should be zocheh to translate many more works of the Maharal. There's a lot more to go after this one. In the small amount of time that I have, I want to talk about three things. And I could easily fill 3-4 hours a week, whatever it is, but I will not keep you here this long. I'll try to be very, very short and very abbreviated. Number one, a little bit about who the Maharal is. Number two, some of the highlights of his overall philosophy. And number three, a sample or two of some of his thoughts, particularly as it connects to the holiday of Shavuot that is coming up in a few days. Maharal, Rav Yehuda ben Betzalel Leva, or Lowy, but Leva is the way it's spelled in Hebrew, lived in the 16th century. He is known as the Maharal of Prague, but in truth, he had a very stormy rabbinical career. He was in Prague at least 3 times, fired, rehired, etc., went back and forth. The Maharal was an extremely multifaceted individual. He was one of the outstanding halachic authorities of his generation. That is something that people sometimes do not pay attention to. But the Maharal was a great, great posek, although paradoxically, he was against the codifications like the Shulchan Aruch, because the Maharal believed that a posek must go back to the original sources of the Talmud and formulated a response. He was not in favor of shortcuts or handbooks or the like. Now, I'll tell you something that only Rav Ovadia Yosef could tell you. Somebody asked Rav Ovadia Yosef, how many times is the Maharal quoted in the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch? And Rav Ovadia was able to come up with a number. I certainly could not, and I don't remember the number. And then he was asked, how many times, what percentage of the times he's quoted is the halacha like him? And he said 100%. So although the Maharal is not necessarily known today as a great halachic authority, he was indeed one of the greatest. And his disciples were very well known as halachic scholars, the Tosfos Yom Tov and the like, and they credited their acumen and their learning to the Maharal. He was a philosopher, he was a mystic. In fact, in many, many ways, one of the ways that the Maharal is described is he tried to convey mystical, Kabbalistic ideas in the language and terminology of medieval philosophy. He attempted to use rationalistic vocabulary to convey deep spiritual ideas. In fact, many of the terms that people think are Maharal terms, chomer, tzura, matter, form, are really just Aristotelian or Platonic terms, the Maharal's vocabulary was not necessarily unusual. He was utilizing philosophical terminology, but he was expressing ideas that were decidedly not necessarily rooted in the philosophical tradition. He lived during the Renaissance time. He lived particularly in Prague. There was an explosion of interest in science, especially astronomy, etc. And the Maharal was very, very concerned with the notion that people were assuming that there are many statements in the Talmud that contradicted science, and the notion of reconciliation was important to him, but I will say in a few moments that his concept of reconciliation was very different than that we might normally assume. So we're talking about philosopher, mystic, scientist, mathematician, posek. He was also a very active communal leader, both in terms of dealing with the non-Jewish authorities, but more importantly, as a Rav of Prague. In fact, this is why he got fired a number of times. He was really a social activist. He had radical ideas regarding the educational system, which were not really radical. He was just going back to Chazal. But he was very much against the emphasis on pilpul, in which young children were already introduced to dialectics without having a firm background in Tanakh and Mishnah. He was a major educational reformer. He was a proponent of what is called anti-sumptuary legislation, which means he was concerned about the cost of weddings and simchas and the fact that it was bankrupting the Jewish community, as well as attracting jealousy and animosity on behalf of the Goyim that saw Jewish ostentatious. Of course, that already got him in trouble. That was part of the reasons he got in trouble. He was very concerned with slander when people would spread Lashon Hara in various public forums, and he often took stands against the wealthy and powerful. One has to recognize that the Maharal, in spite of his prodigious scholarship and the many, literally thousands of pages that he authored, was not an ivory tower person. He was intimately involved in the difficult communal issues that Jewish people faced at the time. The one thing that he may not have done, as Rabbi Wein alluded to, is he may not have made the golem. It's paradoxically that the most famous thing that everybody knows about the Maharal might be the one thing that he didn't do. But, as has often been said, anyone who believes all of these stories is a fool. But if you believe they couldn't have happened, you're an apikoros, which means I don't know if the Maharal made a golem, but I do believe the Maharal could have done so if he wanted to. There are other ways of dealing with the problems of the Jewish people. Maharal wrote many, many books. Now, it's interesting. I can't give you a whole bibliographical survey, but for hundreds and hundreds of years, the Maharal's books were comparatively unknown. They were not studied widely, even after his death. Hasidim had a special affinity. The Balatanya, who himself was a descendant of the Maharal, it always had a certain connection to the Maharal's books, but they actually remained fairly dormant and unfortunately underutilized until the 20th century, when new editions came out, and in the world of the yeshivos, the Maharal became very, very popular, although I have to say, more people speak of the Maharal, not too many people understand the Maharal, but nevertheless, it's a very popular type of limud. The truth is, the two people of the 20th century that are given credit for bringing Maharal